next panel is really looking at one of the other big trends of today, which is the emergence of big data, of new metrics, new ways of testing people's talents and capabilities. So I'd like to invite the panel to come out to discuss hacking human resources, new metrics for attracting and retaining top talent. And we have Cesar Perales, who is the Secretary of State for New York State, and one of the things he oversees is recruitment. Secondly, we have Edith Cooper, who is Global Head of Human Capital Management at Goldman Sachs. And we're going to know everything about Goldman Sachs' recruitment strategy at the end of today, given how much we've already been discussing it. And Max Simkoff, who is the co-founder and chief executive of Evolv, which is a company that produces many of these new tools and metrical analysis products. So I'd like to start with you, Edith. Goldman Sachs, we heard already, is a sort of extremely rigorous in its recruitment strategy and practices, and in the way it develops top talent. How are you, as a company, finding that your processes and the way you go about what you do in terms of recruitment and development is being changed by the new data, analytical tools that are available, and so forth? Some of the new practices that are emerging.
Sure. Well, Goldman Sachs is a people business, and the success of our firm really hinges upon our ability to attract terrific people who want to be in the financial services business for their careers. The reality is we've always used data because you have to run human capital management, HR. It's about managing the capital of people. So we've always used data, right? So we looked at GPAs, data point. We look at compensation, streams of data, and we have to do that all over the world. The real big difference between even 5 years ago and now is the fact that we've been able to capture the data in a much more comprehensive view such that we can really analyze and think about it in a more sophisticated fashion. So we know we have 30,000 people. We have a good sense of the population we have at hand, but when we go out and recruit, we get 200,000 applications. Is that good or bad, right? There are 50+% of students on campus that are women. We hire 30% of our population as women. What does that say? The data tells us that there may be people out there that we are not attracting, and social media tools enable us to reach out and get that more. Generally, I found that with the increased focus on data, we still have to use instinct, because after all, we're talking about people. We're not talking about widgets, okay? So data is important. Data helps us inform our instincts and our actions. All of our development programs now are based more on data and intuition overlying that data. We do a people survey. 28,000 of our people participated in that. They have a lot to say. Millennials have a lot to say. Our partners have a lot to say. We use that data from the people survey to inform our learning programs, and then we use the results of that to judge whether those things are effective. It's about people and connectivity, but data informs our decisions in a very different way.
If you had to identify one change above all that you've noticed in the last couple of years that's come out of this focus on data and the new tools that are available, what would be the one thing that seems to have made the biggest difference?
I think it's a general expectation that we're informed and smarter with facts that back up our intuition. It makes a really big difference. Again, we are talking about human dynamics, but it's just like running a business. You wouldn't build this building if you didn't know what the economics of the building were going to be in the future. Why would you continue to hire people if you don't know what the impact of those people were going forward? We have the information. We've consolidated into a central place. It informs our decisions. We think we're much smarter as a result.
Now, Cesar, you, as a state, I guess there are different employment challenges anyway that maybe to a commercial business.
Absolutely.
But how are you seeing data and the new analytical techniques actually help you recruit?
Well, let me not answer your question and talk about what I wanted to talk about.
Excellent. I'll let you do that for
and
2 or 3
then
minutes.
I'll let you link it to data when I'm finished. The reality is that those of us in government also need terrific people. And government has not always hired terrific people. And so we're stuck with a system that's a little different. You've got most people are hired through a civil service system where they take an exam and have to show expertise in a particular area. And the people who actually make the decisions are brought in by the people elected to run the government. And traditionally, or too often in the past, it's patronage. It's the victor gets the spoils, and too often people that were brought into government were not necessarily expert at what they were doing. I think the best example is how we all reacted to the failure of the federal government to respond to Katrina, to this. And what is becoming increasingly clear is that government is getting more and more complex. You can't go to the clubhouse and expect to run a good government. And so when this governor, Andrew Cuomo, was elected, he and I had a series of conversations, and one of them revolved around his frustration about being able to identify good people and bring them in to his government. And to quote his expression, we need to develop a bench. And he asked me if I could help him do that. And what I did was to develop the concept of a fellowship program that was intended to keep people in the government. There have been a number of fellowship programs in which people are exposed to government, and it's great. They go back to what they were doing. This was intended to groom people to take responsible roles in our government in the near future. And what is perhaps unique about it is that we advertised not knowing what the response would be, and we got close to 900 applicants. Bright young people. We said you had to have 3 years of experience in any field, and got all of these people who obviously, many of them, when we spoke to them, were very interested in public service. They knew that they were not going to make a lot of money, but they wanted to make a difference, and did not know how to get a job in government, except for that civil service job, which you'd earn $50,000 a year when you made it to the top. So this idea of getting into management training was almost unknown to the government. And so we developed what we call the Empire State Fellowship. We've now got a second one called the Excelsior Fellowship. The idea being that we are trying to attract new people, generalists, people who are forward-thinking, people who can adapt. And you can't do that with an exam. You can't do that by going to the local political leader and asking him who's been hanging around the clubhouse long enough that now needs to be rewarded. And so we are using our own set of tools in which we go through all of these resumes, get experienced but interested government officials to participate in interviews. And after all is said and done, we end up with maybe 20 that we want to select. And then we mentor them. The idea being each one of them is assigned a senior official in the government. Each one of them is given training. In Albany, we have the Rockefeller Institute, which is part of the State University. And we are, for the first time, actually grooming and training younger folks to begin to take more and more important jobs in the government. And it is making a terrific difference. It affects the whole system. It affects the people that are mentoring them. It affects the people that these younger folks relate to in the bureaucracy. And we are very, very pleased with the results of it, and we think it's going to make a big difference.
And as you look at the talent that's coming through these fellowships, I mean, what are the key indicators you're looking for as to whether someone is going to be in that final 20 that you want to?
Well, I mean, to some extent, you use data to the extent that you look at people's, how they've done at school. We want to know how well they've done in their job. But I think you can't give up on intuition. And I think that you go through a series of interviews with folks, and the way we do it, we have them ranked, and they go through a series of interviews so that we get a sense of what everyone thought of the potential of this person. And so I guess we do use metrics. We add up the points they each got. And
I knew I'd get you back onto the topic of it.
Yeah, I brought it right back. This is what I'm talking about. And we make the judgment as to whether or not we think this person has the right attitude, whether they have the right people skills, which are extremely important in government, and whether they have judgment. That's the other important thing in our government. We've hired a lot of smart people that have terrible judgment. We don't want more of those. And so we try to focus on the sense of, can this person make the right kind of decision under what are often very trying circumstances?
And I'm just trying to imagine Kevin Spacey sitting there using your approach, and it's not really working for me in terms of the House of Cards. It's so, I mean, is the political process really able to depoliticize in that sense?
We have to. We definitely. For too long, we've focused on the political types, and it doesn't work. This is much too complex. Just trying to run a government today with people that come out of the political world would be a serious mistake. We've seen the effects of it time and time again, so that we are very careful to make sure that we've got folks with the right judgment.
Now, Max, I assume you're going to talk a bit about data and metrics and so forth. Tell us a bit about Evolv and the perspective that you have as to how the world of recruitment and talent development is being changed by big data and by the new software tools that are available.
Sure. So maybe a little bit of a contrast here to some of the things that have already been said in terms of our customers are large global enterprises who are actually looking to move away from using intuition in making hiring decisions, promotion decisions, in many cases even termination decisions. They hire tens of thousands of people a year for mostly entry-level jobs. And what they've ultimately found, what most companies in the Fortune 500 have found recently, is that everybody has become a data company almost overnight. So if you look at the Fortune 500, 26 million employees, the average company has about 52,000 people. And we've seen that these companies use an alphabet soup of systems to track data in very siloed manner across the enterprise. And ultimately, they've got millions and millions of data points that they're just now starting to bring together so that they can make decisions around them, and they're starting to let the data tell them how they should make decisions instead of using intuition. And some of the things that we found that are somewhat counterintuitive, just to give some examples from some of our clients, and some of these are somewhat controversial. One that's been talked about in the press is that, by and large, for a lot of entry-level positions, people with criminal backgrounds tend to stay on the job for longer. They tend to perform 1 to 1.5 percentage points better on any objective productivity metric, whether it's...
Is that any kind of criminal background or particular?
So we've got a little bit of a selection bias in the data set, given that most of our customers who do allow criminal background to still qualify for employment generally put some kind of threshold on what type of criminal conviction allows someone to be considered. Mm-hmm. And again, we find a lot that we're getting into, then we get into an interesting discussion with our customers about causation versus correlation. People want to talk about, well, of course, criminals stay longer because they have less career optionality, or of course they stay longer because they've gotten a job and they know the value of work. And ultimately, we're not in the causation business, we're in the correlation business, and we're helping customers listen to their data, when they can pull it all together and put it in one place and see what it's telling them so that they can make the right conclusion.
And your finding is that the kind of recommendations your data analysis produces are quite different to what intuition would have told people?
In many cases, yes, and in some cases, it's not even necessarily that they go against intuition. It's that it requires bringing data together from disparate places and putting analytics on top of it to surface things that you would have never, the human eye would have never been able to find. Another example that we found recently is the walkability score, which I've always been somewhat skeptical of when I see it in real estate listings. It seemed like every house that's put on the market has a walk score of 98 or something.
Which means what?
So the walkability score is a score that collects information about conveniences, whether there's a supermarket nearby, restaurants, gas stations. It turns out that the walkability score for office locations is actually very important. So even middling walkability scores they drive retention rates at companies who have these locations in middle walkability scores 25 to 50% higher than low walkability scores. And so this gets to it's similar to what Edith was mentioning in terms of when you think about the economics of, we'll have customers say, hey, we've got 2 locations in Phoenix, and we think we need to consolidate and move to Tucson because Tucson's real estate is $2 a square foot and Phoenix is $3 a square foot. And we say, well, have you considered that the difference in walkability score actually means that your retention risk is going to drive $5 to $10 million of attrition cost that hasn't been priced into your analysis?
Ada, to what extent are you finding intuition being reinforced by the sort of analytics you're doing, or to what extent are you being challenged?
I think that it doesn't always come out on one side versus the other. I think that the biggest gains we're going to see, as Max mentioned, is the result of being able to aggregate all the information so that you could get information to inform your decisions, particularly with respect to hiring and promotion decisions. I have to tell you, I think that you can get all the data, all the numbers you want, but it really is going to come down to, is that individual or group of individuals going to be effective in the environment of Goldman Sachs, right? I mean, if you listen to some of the attributes that Cesar was talking about earlier with respect to what makes someone a great candidate for government, judgment, credibility, entrepreneurialism, et cetera, you could take out New York State government and put in Goldman Sachs. You could take out Evolv and put in, it's very interchangeable. The difference is really going to be whether, they can connect with the organization. So I think data informs your thinking. I think that at times you can alter your course, but the bottom line is it's always going to come down to a judgment decision based upon all of those factors.
So do you echo that?
Yes, very much. I mean, I dismissed data just to be facetious, but the reality is I suspect we look at people's resumes very similarly to the way people in private business would look at someone's resume. When we look at their experience, that obviously is, we examine it in a similar way. But I think the point and the reason I emphasized what I did was that the government has for many, many years relied on a civil service system, so that for the majority of the people in the government, they've taken exams, been graded, and not all of them have turned out to be good. Some of them are. I mean, I'm not.
It's a very interesting. I was talking for a story I was writing about the MOOCs, Udacity and edX and Coursera that have come along and really challenged traditional higher education. And talking to the founder of Coursera, she was saying, basically, we're going to make the degree redundant because we can now test people's capabilities and credential them so much earlier in the process once they're on a MOOC, and you can sort of track what they're doing, that in fact, in a way, the university degree and maybe some of the other qualifications are going to be made redundant by companies actually figuring out their own tests that they can do much earlier in the process. I mean, do any of you share that feeling? Are you developing your own alternatives?
Listen, I have a really strong view that There's a lot of learning that goes on in universities around the world, and it's in the classroom, and you can get an A, B, or C on those courses. But perhaps the most meaningful thing that people get out of going to university is the opportunity to engage and learn and explore with their classmates, right? Working with other people. It was a point that I think was made in an earlier comment that, it's so easy and straightforward right now to get information, right? It's at the tip of your fingers. If you're not my age and you're younger, you'll get it a lot faster, but you can get that information. That's not what education is about, it really at its core, disseminating and taking in information. It's really about connecting the dots and learning how to operate with other really bright people to create ideas, concepts, and results. And that's the same thing with corporate America or private sector or public sector. It's really, about how do human beings interact with other human beings. And I think that to the extent that we can make the data aggregation more efficient, the more brain cells we can use on thinking and conceptualizing, being entrepreneurial, creating new businesses and ideas, in our case for clients, in your case for citizens of New York, in your case, for growth. But that's really at the core of it.
But of course, getting a Harvard degree doesn't tell you anything about your social skills, really, does it? I think fundamentally, or your ability to work in a team or anything of that kind. I think one of the things that seems to be coming through, I don't know whether you find this, Max, is that, you can actually now, with some of these online courses, you can tell whether someone would be a good programmer or whatever, who would never, maybe sitting in India, and you can recruit from India. You don't have to wait for them to go through Stanford and
But the interesting thing, though, is
education.
if you were to walk through the campus of Stanford or Harvard or NYU or State University of New York, and you look around that campus, what do you see? You see young men, women, Latinos, Asians, blacks, gay people, straight people. You see everything. And you have to learn how to operate in that kind of complex world of different people and different perspectives. And so I actually think that, yes, you're right. You could sit in a screen and interact with the screen, and someone can see how your brain works and whether you're quick at this or not quick at that. But we all know that you can get an A in a course and you could have a 4.0 GPA and not be able to function in any place other than in the library, right?
So are you finding that the analytics allow you to get at some of these softer or human capital type measures that you wouldn't get in the test from, you wouldn't be able to identify looking at exam results?
We do, but there's an important distinction, because I do agree with what Edith is saying, that the important distinction is for entry-level positions. It is possible, and in many cases now, our customers have done away with their old hiring process altogether. They don't even do interviews. They actually put people through a battery of standardized assessment questions that they've developed after they've looked at the data in aggregate. And for these entry-level positions, you can actually glean more in many cases from somebody's answers to questions in a standardized fashion that have then been correlated to other people's retention and performance information than you can say about education or work history. But I want to be careful to say it's for entry-level positions. Now, the fact of the matter is 2/3 of the global labor force is working in an entry-level hourly job. It's nearly 100 million people in this country, and it's very easy for us to forget in the world of professional development and conferences like this and LinkedIn is that most people are actually finding employment by going to a job board, applying for a job, and getting an offer in the same day. And so the power of using some of these standardized methods of measuring competencies and behaviors and motivations in an online fashion in the hiring process is in many cases driving a lot more statistical accuracy with respect to retention and performance than traditional methods of screening.
Let me just add something, because there is another very important element in the selection process that I make for our government, and that has to do with diversity. And I don't just mean racial and ethnic diversity. I mean diversity of experience. And you don't get that, I think. Well, certainly, you're talking about entry-level jobs, and I'm talking about an entirely different role in our government. But I think it is important that we have people in our government who understand the different lives being lived by our citizenry. I think it would be wrong in a state like New York to only hire people from urban areas. We've got enormous problems in rural New York State, tremendous unemployment, no economic development going on in parts of our state. We need people who can understand what that is like. So it's that kind of diversity of experience that we think is very, very important. And I don't know whether we will at some point be able to develop some data sets that'll help us to identify that. But it is an important element, and I feel I had to communicate that to this audience.
Great. Well, let's take 2 or 3 comments, questions from around the room. Who'd like to kick us off on the left there?
Thank you. Excuse me. This question's for Edith.
Can you say who you are as well?
Oh, sorry. David Gibbons, partner with Refinery Leadership. You had mentioned earlier that you use data to design what you're doing around development. Could you maybe expand upon that? What kind of data are you looking at that helps you with developing your workforce?
Sure.
Let's see if there's a couple of other questions as well. Anyone that's not said anything yet? Well, okay, gentleman at the front. In the spirit of diversity, I would encourage non-males, perhaps, than transgendered people to also kind of offer.
There's a whole group right behind me who's starting to speak, so we'll just drop the baton back there. I'm curious, just the criminal counterintuitive finding, if you could share any others, because that's fascinating to me. It's not an obvious finding at all, and I think I'd be interested to see what else you found that might be useful to us.
And do we have one more? Yeah, over there. Great.
Lisa Zanino. I'd be curious to hear you comment about big data and not just developing people, but really senior leadership. Are you finding correlations in data that you're tracking as they progress through their career? Is there anything that's indicative of what will make a great leader?
So you mean right at the very top of the organization? Yeah. Edith, why don't you go first?
Sure. Should I answer all the questions,
Yeah,
or just the
why
one
not?
directed to me, or anything else I want to talk about?
Yeah. This is your kind of wrap-up.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Okay, so with respect to how we're thinking about data and how it informs our development of individuals, both at the junior and the senior levels, we've got information on backgrounds from school. We have annual review data. We do a 360 review for all of our people. Plus, we promote people from analyst, associate VP, et cetera, on to partner. And at each one of those steps, we have gotten much smarter about really getting away from the he said, she said of it, to the point earlier, just the preconceived notions, and really look at the data around how have people performed at different steps, and does that indicate future performance. Now, I have to say, at all these steps, you have to be very careful, because when you look at the past as a predictor of the future, you could be continuing to project certain biases in the system that would make it very problematic to look at the true impact of those that are any way different from the majority population. But it's one factor that you can think about. We also select our senior leadership, I think, in a very unique way. It's a result of the days of being a private partnership. So we literally get feedback from peers on those that are promoted to managing director at the firm. And that's another set of data that we can use that historically, quite frankly, before we started really thinking about the overall pool, that we really didn't look at. And so we literally can now, because we're pulling the data into one place, say, let's look at the profile of people that have gotten promoted. Let's look at the skills and the attributes that they have that get them over that line, and then let's look back at those that are coming up in the system and see where those gaps are. Because if you don't get informed in using real experiences, you can really get sucked into the preconceived notions that I was talking about before. So intuition is really critical, but one of the things that data does, it helps you stay a little bit more honest. Right? It really helps you stay more honest. I think I've probably addressed both of your questions.
Max.
So actually, I'll pick up where Edith left off. It's a perfect transition. Honesty. So to answer your first question, other interesting things we found. We've helped our clients develop ways of measuring honesty as a trait in their applicant population for jobs. We've found something somewhat intuitive, that people who are dishonest, and I could give more detail on how we measure this, but people who are dishonest tend to stay for less time on the job and tend to perform.
Until they've been convicted afterwards.
Right. Right. They stay for less time on the job and they perform worse on almost every objective productivity metric except for sales performance. And it's, quota achievement, upsells, cross-sells, just pretty much across the board, several percentage points better. Overtime is another one that we've done a lot of work around for our customers. Again, these are large entry-level populations where overtime can be a huge issue on the P&L. But interestingly enough, having people work no overtime is actually worse for retention, and it's marginally unprofitable when you compare it to having people work a little bit of overtime. So 1 to 3 hours per week is about ideal. Anything more than 3 actually gets people to quit at a much higher rate than if they're offered 1 to 3 or 0 hours of overtime. With respect to the question about how do we use big data for professional development and leadership, we think about leaders in our world as frontline supervisors, shift managers, team leads. These are people who are managing a team of usually 15 to 20 people doing entry-level work. And we have plenty of data on these, what we consider to be leaders in their field, to show what makes them effective and what makes them not effective. What's maybe more important for our customers is the first thing they want to look at is how do I graph the retention of the teams of people that all of our supervisors have managed over a historical period of time so that we can understand where the distribution is in terms of performance. And most of you in this room, if you have several thousand entry-level employees, will find that it is almost a perfect 80-20 distribution. That you'll have 20% of your worst supervisors driving 80% of your negative attrition, and you'll have 20% of your best supervisors driving 80% of your positive retention. And that information is power, right? Our customers do stuff with it that enables them to get better people and increase profitability.
I'm going to give the last word to the
Just
politician.
a last comment that the state government does not need any more criminals.
I thought that was a requirement for the job.
I will leave it at that.
And on that note,
Well done, exactly.
I think we'd like to thank this panel for a very stimulating and amusing conversation. Thank you all for the first session. Thank you very much.